Many Asian Americans struggle with boundaries and people pleasing, particularly when it comes to wanting their family's approval for big decisions. So when it comes time to set boundaries around their lives, they may be afraid of making their parents or other family members mad. Here to share how to practice setting simple boundaries that can honor your family members while still prioritizing themselves is author and work-life balance coach Nicole Song. Welcome, Nicole.
Thank you so much for having me, Desiree.
Yeah, we're excited to have you on. And you mentioned that Asian Americans struggle with boundaries and people pleasing. Could you elaborate more on that?
Sure. Well, Asian American cultures tend to value the whole over the individual. So as a result, it can feel pretty difficult when people want to actually venture outside of what their family might for them, whether it's career or relationships or choices of where they might live.
Okay, and so let's change the narrative and set up boundaries, which you say starts with knowing our why. What does that mean exactly?
Well, when you really understand what's the most important thing for you, it becomes much easier to start to set your boundaries. Why do you need to set boundaries? Is it because you are really clear on the person that you want to be with and your family might not approve? Is it around a career you're taking that's a non traditional pathway? What does that look like for yourself? And when you know really clearly what your own boundaries are, it's much easier to start to set them with other people in your life.
And once we figure out our why, what's the most important first step for boundaries?
The most important first step is actually really starting to set and sustain boundaries with yourself. So if you're not really setting boundaries and are really clear in your own life, and the examples of this are like getting enough sleep or taking care of yourself or moving your body. If you're not really doing that for yourself, it can be even more difficult to be grounded and clear to set boundaries with other people. So my first recommendation to anyone who's really looking to set boundaries is, are you setting boundaries with yourself that feel really good? That's when you can start to go into the world and set boundaries with other folks in your life.
And in setting those boundaries, do you need to have a big confrontation with family when you're setting them?
No, I actually don't really believe when you have clear boundaries, you need big confrontations. Instead, actually, what I feel like often people are looking for is approval. And that's why the
Mhm.
confrontation can happen. But if you have really good, deep approval of yourself and your own choices, it's much easier to have. You're not looking for approval. You're actually in conversation saying, hey, these are my choices. I'm the only one who can really make them. And it's a lot easier to be in conversation with people you love rather than feeling like you have to have this big push and pull with them.
Yeah, I like how you phrase that. It's a conversation. It doesn't have to be confrontational. And what if you feel guilty after setting a boundary? Because sometimes setting those boundaries means telling people no. So, what would you suggest for that?
It can be challenging for folks. And one of the big things I say is that when you really are clear about what your commitment, and this actually goes back to knowing your why, it's actually a lot easier to leave the guilt behind. One of the big things for people is if they're not clear on their boundaries, that's when they start to waver a little bit. The people pleasing might come in.
Right.
Sometimes people get a little bit rigid around their boundaries because they're not really clear. I call them boundary tendencies. So
Mhm.
when that's coming in, they start to feel a little bit more challenged. But when you actually know what it's about, you can just be really clear. If you feel a little guilt, you can say, hey, you know what? I know why I'm doing this, and then move forward.
You said it very clearly, Nicole. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. To get more tips on setting boundaries, you can follow Nicole on Instagram at Nicole Song.